Lights of Gangnam usually felt like a fever dream, but tonight, they just felt like a headache. Nikki adjusted the hem of her black uniform skirt, her dark skin glowing under the strobe lights of aura. Being a girl from Jersey, she was used to noise, used to attitude, and definitely used to men who didn't know how to take no for an answer. Across the club, in a glass-walled VIP sanctuary that overlooked the dance floor, Han Siwoo sat in a high-backed leather chair. To the public, he was the youngest board member of the Shilla Hotel group. To the men trembling in the shadows behind him, he was the axe. He was currently watching the security feed on a tablet, his face a mask of bored stone. "The Choi Syndicate is late with the shipment," his lieutenant whispered. Siwoo didn't blink. His eyes were fixed on the monitor. He watched a tall, muscular American woman weave through the crowd with a tray of crystal flutes. She moved with a rhythmic grace that didn't belong in this stiff city. Suddenly, a hand reached out. A drunken heir to a tech fortune grabbed Nikki's backside, squeezing hard enough to make her stumble. Siwoo leaned forward, his grip tightening on his whiskey glass. In Seoul, a waitress would usually bow, apologize for the inconvenience, and disappear. Nikki didn't bow. She spun on her heel, her eyes flashing like polished onyx. Before the man could even smirk, she wound back. Crack. The sound of the slap was so sharp it seemed to cut through the heavy bass of the EDM track. The man's head whipped to the side, and as he turned back, 4 distinct finger marks began to bloom scarlet against his pale skin. In the VIP booth, Siwoo's lips curved into the ghost of a predatory smile. "Who," he rasped, his voice like sliding gravel, "is that?" The silence that followed the slap was more deafening than the music. The drunk heir, Park Jisung, stared at Nikki in a state of pure, shocked ego death. No one in this zip code had ever touched him without permission, let alone struck him. You crazy bitch," Jisung roared, lunging forward. He reached for Nikki's throat, his face contorted in a mask of entitlement and rage. Nikki didn't flinch. She stepped back into a defensive stance she'd learned on the streets of Newark, her tray held like a shield. "Touch me again and I'll give you the matching set on the other cheek," she spat, her voice a low, dangerous hum. Before Jisung could make contact, the air in the room shifted. It became cold, heavy, and suffocating. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. 2 giants in charcoal suits stepped in, flanking the table. "The chairman finds this noise distasteful," one of the men said. Nikki looked up. High above, behind the tinted glass of the VIP balcony, she caught the silhouette of a man. He was standing now, his hands shoved into the pockets of a suit that cost more than her college tuition. Even from a distance, his gaze felt like a physical weight pressing against her skin. The security guards didn't grab Nikki. They grabbed Jisung. Despite his screaming about his father's influence, they dragged him toward the service exit. Nikki let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She smoothed her skirt, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked back up at the glass, but the silhouette was gone. "Nikki, what the hell were you thinking?" Her manager, Minho, hissed as he dragged her into the back office. He was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "That was a park. You can't just go around hitting gods." "That god had his hands on my body, Minho," Nikki snapped, her Jersey accent thickening with her frustration. "I don't care if he owns the moon. He doesn't own me." "It doesn't matter now," Minho whispered, looking terrified. "He wants to see you." Nikki frowned. "Who, Park? Tell him to bring a lawyer." "No, not Park, the axe." Nikki went still. She'd heard the whispers in the locker rooms. The man who owned the club, the hotels, and half the docks in Incheon. The man people claimed could make a body disappear before the sun rose. Minho led her to the private elevator. The doors were brushed gold. As they ascended to the penthouse level, the thumping bass of the club faded into an eerie, expensive silence. The doors opened to a sprawling office that overlooked the Seoul skyline. Han Siwoo was sitting behind a desk of black obsidian. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at a jagged piece of metal, a small, ornamental axe that he was using to trim a cigar. "Leave us," Siwoo commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but Minho practically tripped over his own feet to get back into the elevator. Nikki stood in the center of the room, her chin tilted up. She refused to be the first one to break the silence. Siwoo finally looked up. Up close, he was devastating. His hair was slicked back, revealing a sharp, angular jawline and eyes that looked like they had seen things no human should survive. He didn't look like a businessman. He looked like a predator wearing a businessman's skin. He stood up and walked toward her. He was tall, looming over her, but Nikki stood her ground. "Your hand," he said, reaching out. Nikki instinctively pulled back, but he was faster. He caught her wrist in a grip of iron and velvet. He turned her palm over, inspecting the reddened skin where she had struck Jisung. "You hit him hard," Siwoo remarked, his thumb tracing the heat on her palm. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to Nikki's core. Most people here value their lives more than their pride. "Back home, pride is all you have," Nikki countered, her voice steady despite the way her pulse was racing. "And I don't let anyone put their hands on me, including you." She tried to yank her hand away, but he pulled her closer instead, until she was inches from his chest. She could smell sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and something darker, something like rain on hot asphalt. "I am not like that boy," Siwoo whispered, his eyes dropping to her lips. "If I put my hands on you, Nicole, it won't be a mistake, and you won't want to hit me." Nikki's breath hitched. "Is that a threat or a promise, Mr. Han?" "It's a fact," he replied. He let go of her wrist, but the ghost of his touch remained, burning. He walked back to his desk and picked up a heavy gold card. "You won't be working the floor anymore. You're a liability to the staff now. Park's family will be looking for blood." Nikki felt a cold pit in her stomach. "Are you firing me?" "I'm moving you. You will stay at my residence in the Shilla. You will be my personal assistant. You go where I go. You eat when I eat." "I'm not a pet," Nikki snapped, her eyes narrowing. "I have a life, I have classes." Siwoo stepped back into her personal space, his shadow engulfing her. "You have a target on your back. Tonight, you chose to strike a snake. Tomorrow, his nest will come for you." He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of her hair. "You can be free and dead, or you can be mine and safe. Choose." The possessiveness in his voice was terrifying, but there was something else, an intensity that made Nikki's blood run hot. She knew she should run, should head straight for the airport and never look back. But the way he looked at her, as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered, held her captive. "I want a contract," she whispered, "and I don't sleep with the boss." Siwoo let out a low, dark chuckle that vibrated in his chest. "We shall see, Nikki. We shall see." By 3 a.m. Nikki was being driven through the rain-slicked streets of Seoul in a blacked-out Maybach. Siwoo sat beside her, silent, his attention on his phone, yet she could feel him watching her through the reflection in the window. They arrived at a private entrance to one of the most prestigious hotels in Gangnam. The staff bowed so low their foreheads nearly touched their knees as Siwoo walked through. He didn't acknowledge them. He only had eyes for the woman walking beside him. He led her to a suite that was larger than her entire apartment building in Jersey. Floor to ceiling, windows offered a panoramic view of the city. "This is your room," he said, opening a door to a master suite draped in silk and marble. "My quarters are through that door. It stays unlocked." Nikki looked at the door, locking it from my side. Siwoo paused at the threshold, his silhouette framed by the city lights. "Try it. I'd like to see how long a lock lasts against a man they call the Axe." He shut the main door, leaving Nikki alone in the silence of her new, gilded prison. She walked to the window, seeing her own reflection, a girl from Jersey who had just slapped her way into the arms of the most dangerous man in Korea. Deep, dark, beautiful trouble. Nikki didn't sleep. The silk sheets of the Shilla suite felt too smooth, too much like a bribe. She spent the night packing the perimeter of the room, her Newark instincts screaming that she was a bird in a very expensive cage. At 7 a.m. there was a sharp knock. A maid entered with a rolling rack of clothes, designer labels Nikki only recognized from music videos. "The chairman requests your presence for breakfast," the woman said, eyes downcast. Nikki picked out a sharp, charcoal-colored blazer and trousers. If she was going to be an assistant, she was going to dress for the job, not for him. She walked into the dining area to find Si-woo reading a digital newspaper. On the table sat a sprawling spread of traditional Korean breakfast and American coffee. "Eat," he said without looking up. "I'm not hungry," Nikki replied, sitting across from him. "I want to know what the plan is. I have a life, Si-woo. I'm not just going to sit here and wait for the snakes to bite." Si-woo set the tablet down. His eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept either. "The Park family filed a police report this morning. They are claiming you assaulted an innocent man. They want you deported and jailed." Nikki's heart dropped. "Assaulted, he touched me first." "In this country, his word is gold. Yours is air." Si-woo leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. "But my word is steel. I've handled the police, but the parks, they don't use the law for revenge. They use the streets." The axe didn't spend his days in an office. He spent them moving between the high-rises of Gangnam and the dark warehouses of the Seoul docks. To Nikki's surprise, Si-woo kept his word. He took her with him. As they stepped out of the hotel, a fleet of black SUVs sat idling. Si-woo grabbed her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a claim. "Stay behind me," he whispered as they entered a sleek boardroom in the heart of the business district. The room was filled with older men in gray suits, the board of the hotel group. They looked at Nikki with blatant disdain, their whispers filling the room like the hissing of vipers. "Chairman Han," one elder began, "bringing a foreigner of her status into these chambers is highly irregular." Si-woo pulled out a chair for Nikki at the head of the table right next to his. He didn't sit. He leaned over the table, his knuckles white. "She is my personal ward. Any insult to her status is an insult to my judgment, and we all know what happens when my judgment is questioned." He reached into his jacket, and for a second the entire room held its breath, expecting him to pull out the blade that gave him his name. Instead, he pulled out a fountain pen and slammed it onto the table. "Sign the merger," he commanded, "now." The drive back was tense. Nikki watched the city blur past, her mind reeling. She saw the way these powerful men flinched when Si-woo moved. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a tidal wave. "Why do you keep me around?" she asked suddenly. "You could have just paid me off to leave the country." Si-woo turned to her, his dark eyes tracing the line of her throat. "Because I've never seen anyone fight back against the world without a weapon. You used your bare hand. I want to see what else you're capable of." Suddenly, the lead SUV in their convoy exploded into a ball of orange flame. "Get down," Si-woo roared, throwing his body over Nikki's as their driver slammed on the brakes. The windows of the Maybach shattered as a hail of bullets peppered the reinforced glass. Nikki's ears rang, the smell of gunpowder filling the car. Through the chaos, she saw Si-woo reach into the door panel and pull out a sleek, black handgun. He looked at her, his face devoid of fear, replaced by a cold, terrifying calm. "Stay on the floor. Don't move until I come back for you." Nikki huddled in the footwell, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Outside, the sounds of war erupted. Shouts in Korean, the rhythmic thud of suppressed gunfire, and the wet sound of metal meeting bone. She couldn't just sit there. She crawled toward the shattered window, peering out. Si-woo was a whirlwind of violence. He didn't just shoot. He moved with the precision of a dancer. Two men lunged at him with pipes. He disarmed the first with a kick that sounded like a breaking branch and used the second as a human shield. He was the axe in full bloom, It was horrifying, it was beautiful. A third man approached the car from the blind side, a knife in his hand, eyes fixed on Nikki. "Hey," Nikki screamed, grabbing a heavy glass Voss bottle from the car's console. As the man reached through the broken window, Nikki didn't scream for help. She swung the bottle with every ounce of Jersey strength she had. It shattered against the man's temple, sending him sprawling into the asphalt. Siwoo turned, seeing the downed man and Nikki standing over him with the jagged neck of the bottle. The sirens were distant, but the threat was over. Siwoo's men were cleaning the street with a terrifying efficiency. Siwoo walked toward the car, his shirt torn, a smear of blood across his cheekbone. He reached in and pulled Nikki out, his hands trembling, not with fear but with an adrenaline-fueled rage. "I told you to stay down," he growled, slamming her back against the side of the car. "And I told you I'm not a pet," Nikki shouted back, her chest heaving. "I'm not going to sit and wait to be killed." They stood there in the rain, the neon signs of Gangnam reflecting in the puddles around them. The anger between them was thick, suffocating, and rapidly turning into something else. Siwoo gripped her waist, pulling her flush against him. His breath was hot against her lips. "You are the most infuriating woman I have ever met." "Then let me go," she whispered, though she was leaning into him. "Never," he spat. He crashed his lips onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss, it was a collision. It tasted of rain, copper, and desperation. Nikki wrapped her arms around his neck, her fingers tangling in his damp hair, giving as good as she got. In the middle of a crime scene, surrounded by the wreckage of an assassination attempt, the axe finally found the only thing that could cut him back. The elevator ride back to the penthouse was a blur of hands and teeth. The moment the doors hissed shut, Siwoo pinned Nikki against the gold-leafed wall. His kiss was frantic, a claim staked in the wake of near death. Nikki's pulse was a drumbeat in her throat, her Jersey pride melting into a raw, primal need to feel his weight against her. "You're bleeding," she whispered against his lips, her hands cupping his face. "It's not mine," he rasped, his eyes dark with a possessiveness that would have terrified her yesterday. Today, it was the only thing making her feel alive. He lifted her, her legs instinctively wrapping around his waist as he carried her into the suite. He didn't stop at the bedroom. He dropped her onto the obsidian desk in his office, scattering papers and tablets. The cold stone against her thighs contrasted with the heat of his palms. "I've spent my life taking what I want by force, Nikki," he murmured, his voice vibrating against her skin as he moved to her neck. "But I want you to give in. I want you to choose this." Nikki arched her back, her fingers digging into his shoulders. "I chose the moment I didn't run. Now shut up and show me why they're afraid of you." The intensity of their encounter was a mirror of the violence they'd escaped. Siwoo was worshipful but dominant, his movements calculated and powerful. For Nikki, it was a revelation. Behind the axe persona was a man starved for a connection that wasn't based on fear. In the quiet aftermath, as the moon hung over Seoul, they lay tangled in the silk sheets of his oversized bed. Siwoo's arm was a heavy band across her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "They won't stop at the car," Nikki said, her voice small in the darkness. "Neither will I," Siwoo replied, his lips brushing the back of her shoulder. "The Parks think they are playing a game of chess. They don't realize I've already burned the board." "What did you do?" "I bought their debt, Nikki. Every yen, everyone. By tomorrow morning, I won't just be the man who protected you. I will be the man who owns the roof over their heads. They touched what is mine. Now I take everything that is theirs." Nikki felt a shiver. It wasn't just his power that was dark. It was the absolute way he loved. It was a golden cage, and the bars were getting tighter. The next morning, the news was flooded with reports of a minor traffic accident involving the Shilla group. No mention of bullets or blood. Siwoo's influence was a vacuum, sucking the truth out of the air. He handed Nikki a box. Inside was a dress of deep emerald silk and a necklace of black diamonds. "Tonight is the hotelier's gala," he stated. "The Park family will be there. They expect to see me defeated. Instead, I am going to show them exactly who replaced them at my side." "You're using me as a trophy," Nikki challenged, though she was already reaching for the silk. "No," Siwoo said, stepping behind her and fastening the diamonds around her neck. His eyes met hers in the mirror. "A trophy is something you win. You are the person I'm going to war for. There's a difference." As they entered the ballroom that evening, the music died. Nikki stood tall, her curls pinned back, her skin glowing against the emerald fabric. She wasn't just a black woman from Jersey anymore. She was the queen of the underworld's heart. The gala was a minefield of fake smiles and hidden daggers. Nikki felt the weight of 100 stares, but Siwoo never let go of her hand. "Mr. Han," a voice sneered. It was the elder Park, the father of the man Nikki had slapped. He looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot. "You've made a very expensive mistake for a girl who doesn't even speak our language." Siwoo didn't even look at him. He sipped his champagne, his expression bored. "I speak the language of profit, Park, and currently you are in a deficit. My mistake just cost you your shipping license in Incheon." Park's face turned purple. He looked at Nikki, his lip curling. "You think you're safe? He's the axe. Eventually he'll turn that blade on you." Before Nikki could respond, she felt a sudden sharp pain in her stomach. The glass in her hand felt heavy, too heavy. The room began to tilt. "Siwoo," she gasped, clutching his arm. Siwoo caught her before she hit the floor, his eyes darting to her drink. The coldness that settled over his face was more terrifying than any weapon Nikki had ever seen. "What did you do?" Siwoo's voice was a low, vibrating growl that silenced the entire ballroom. Park laughed, a desperate, hysterical sound. "Just a little something to remind her that she doesn't belong here, a gift from my son." The change in Siwoo was instantaneous. He didn't call the police. He didn't call security. He reached out, his hand closing around Park's throat with the speed of a striking cobra. "I was going to let you live in the streets," Siwoo whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But now, I'm going to bury you under them." He handed the semi-conscious Nikki to his most trusted lieutenant. "Take her to the private clinic. Now, if she so much as coughs, I want a team of surgeons on standby." As Nikki was carried out, she caught a final glimpse of Siwoo. He was pulling a small, folding blade from his cuff, the literal axe. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like the monster everyone feared he was. And for the first time, Nikki wasn't sure if she was more afraid for her life, or for the souls of the men who had crossed him. The world returned to Nikki in flashes of sterile white and the rhythmic hiss-thump of a heart monitor. The poison had been a sophisticated sedative mixed with a caustic irritant, not meant to kill, but to humiliate and cause agonizing pain. When her eyes finally cleared, she saw him. Siwoo was sitting in a chair by the bed, his tuxedo jacket gone, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with tension. His knuckles were bruised, and there was a dark splash of something that wasn't wine on his collar. "You're awake," he said. His voice was cracked, stripped of its usual icy composure. Did you kill him?" Nikki whispered, her throat feeling like she'd swallowed broken glass. Siwoo stood and leaned over her, his hand trembling slightly as he stroked her hair. "I dismantled him. The Parks no longer exist in Gangnam. Not their business, not their reputation, and certainly not their safety." Nikki saw the darkness in his eyes, a bottomless pit of protective fury. She realized then that being loved by the axe was just as dangerous as being hated by him. It was a weight that could crush a person. 3 days later, Nikki was back at the penthouse. She was physically healed, but the atmosphere had changed. The suite was no longer a home, it was a fortress. There were guards at every door, and Siwoo had installed a high-tech security system that tracked her every movement. "I'm going to the library," Nikki said one afternoon, grabbing her bag. "No," the guard at the door replied, his eyes fixed forward. "The chairman has restricted all movement to the suite for the remainder of the week." Nikki's Jersey fire flared. She stormed into Siwoo's office, slamming her hand onto his obsidian desk. "I am not a prisoner, Siwoo. You handled the parks. It's over." Siwoo didn't look up from his ledger. "It is never over. There are others who saw my weakness, and my weakness is you. Until I have purged every potential threat, you stay where I can see you." "I am not your weakness," Nikki hissed, leaning over the desk until she was inches from his face. "I am the woman who slapped a god in your club. If you keep me in a cage, I'll eventually start biting the hand that feeds me." The argument turned into a silent war of wills that lasted until nightfall. Nikki refused to eat. Siwoo refused to relent. Finally, the tension snapped. He came into her room while she was standing on the balcony, looking out at the city she was forbidden to touch. He didn't say a word. He simply grabbed her waist and pulled her back into the room, kicking the door shut. The intimacy that followed was a desperate struggle for dominance. It was raw and heavy with the frustration of the past few days. Every touch was an assertion of ownership. Every moan was a surrender. In the heat of the moment, the boundaries between protector and captor blurred. As they lay exhausted in the tangled sheets, Nikki realized she was addicted to the intensity. He was a monster, but he was her monster. And she was the only person in the world who could make the axe blunt. The peace was short-lived. A new player emerged, a shadow from Siwoo's past known as the Ghost. He was a mercenary Siwoo had once worked with, a man with no face and no mercy. A package arrived at the penthouse, bypassed all security, and was left on Nikki's pillow. Inside was a single silver earring, one Nikki had lost the night of the gala, and a note written in elegant calligraphy. "The axe is only as sharp as his heart is cold. I have your heart." Siwoo's reaction was terrifying. He didn't yell. He became a ghost himself. He stopped speaking, his eyes turning into two black voids. "Pack a bag," he told Nikki. "Where are we going?" "To the only place where I don't have to be a businessman," he said, checking the slide on his pistol. "We're going to the docks." The air in Incheon was thick with the smell of salt and diesel. Siwoo led Nikki to a reinforced safe house hidden beneath a shipping container terminal. "This is where I started," Siwoo said, looking around the grimy concrete walls. "Before the hotels and the boards, I was a butcher here." He handed Nikki a small, compact knife. "I'm going out to find him. If I'm not back by dawn, there is a boat at Pier 7. The captain has been paid to take you to Japan, and from there, back to the States." Nikki gripped the knife, her knuckles white. "You're leaving me here like this." "I am protecting you the only way I know how," he said, kissing her hard, a goodbye disguised as a promise. "If he gets to me, he'll come for you. I won't let that happen." As he walked out into the fog, Nikki realized she couldn't just wait for the boat. Jersey girls didn't run when things got ugly. They grabbed a bigger weapon. Nikki stared at the heavy iron door Siwoo had vanished through. The salt air felt like home, oddly enough. It reminded her of the boardwalks back in Jersey, only grimmer. She looked at the small knife Siwoo had given her, then at the heavy steel pipe leaning against a stack of crates. "Protecting me," she muttered, a dark laugh bubbling up. "Always with the protecting." She knew the ghost was out there, and she knew Siwoo was walking into a trap. Siwoo fought like a surgeon, precise, cold, and efficient. But the ghost knew his style. He wouldn't expect Nikki. He wouldn't expect a woman who grew up fighting for a seat on the PATH train and held her own in Newark back alleys. She didn't head for Pier 7. Instead, she followed the sound of a distant metal clatter. She moved through the shadows of the shipping containers, her heart a steady, heavy thrum. She wasn't a victim. She was the variable Siwoo hadn't accounted for. The ghost was waiting in the center of a hollowed-out warehouse. He was thin, moving with a blurred fluidity that made him look like a smudge in the moonlight. Siwoo stood 20 feet away, his axe blade held low. "You've grown soft, Siwoo," the ghost's voice echoed, high and rasping. "The boardrooms have dulled your edge, and that girl, she's the rust on your blade." "She is the reason I'll enjoy carving you," Siwoo replied, his voice a low-frequency growl. They moved simultaneously. It was a dance of death. The ghost used a long, flexible wire that whistled through the air, while Siwoo countered with brutal, short-range strikes. Nikki watched from the rafters, her breath held. She saw it before Siwoo did, a second mercenary stepping out from behind a crate, raising a silenced pistol toward Siwoo's back. Nikki didn't hesitate. She didn't use the knife. She grabbed a heavy industrial chain hanging from the crane above and swung. The heavy chain caught the gunman across the temple, sending him into a heap of scrap metal. The ghost spun around, distracted for a fraction of a second by the sudden intervention. That was all the space the axe needed. Siwoo closed the distance in 2 blurred steps. The sound that followed was wet and final. The ghost fell to his knees, staring up at Siwoo with wide, disbelieving eyes as the life drained out of him. Siwoo didn't look at the body. He looked up at the rafters, where Nikki was climbing down, her hands covered in grease and her eyes blazing. He met her at the bottom, his hands reaching for her, checking for injuries with a frantic, desperate touch. "I told you to go to the pier," he whispered, pulling her into a crushing embrace. "And I told you I don't follow orders," Nikki gasped, burying her face in his blood-stained shirt. "You're stuck with me, Siwoo, all of me. The jersey parts too." 1 month later. The Shilla Gangnam boardroom was silent. The elders sat in their high-backed chairs, but their eyes were no longer on Siwoo. They were on the woman sitting at his right hand. Nikki wore a suit of sharp, cream-colored silk. She looked every bit the executive, but the way she scanned the room told them she still had the fire that had toppled the Parks. She wasn't a ward or an assistant. She was a partner. After the meeting, Siwoo led her to the balcony of their new penthouse. The city of Seoul sparkled below them like a bed of fallen stars. He stepped behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "The underworld is quiet today," he murmured. "That's because they know better now," Nikki replied, turning in his arms. She traced the scar on his jaw, a permanent reminder of the docks. The possessiveness was still there in his eyes, but it was tempered now by a profound, soul-deep respect. He leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a promise of the heat that awaited them behind closed doors. "You are my heart, Nicole," he whispered against her mouth, "and I will spend the rest of my life making sure the world knows it." "Good," she smiled, pulling him closer, "because I'm not going anywhere."
Oh, wait.